Why do we sit here being silent, watching our leaders turn into tyrants? Have they forgotten which side they're fighting for? Checks and balances set aside and rule of laws, youth and ours, and Constitution openly ignored. Man, I'm not okay. Think we are being played. Is it time for right and left to join a greater cause? Man, I'm not okay. The rich claim to be victimized just to attack the marginalized. This 1% really worth more than all the sick and poor. Always preaching about fellowship while planning their dictatorship. Now we've seen how all of this plays out before. Man, I'm not okay. Think we are being played. Time for you and I to join our country's call. Man, I'm not okay. Ever wonder all the mystery, why they whitewash our history, keep dividing is their plan? All in all, such a scam. Algorithm very sly, only used to spread the lies. Politicians know well, hate is simple to upsell. Man, I'm not okay. Think we are being played. Time for you and I to join our country's call.
We are not okay. America is not okay, and we all know that. Former Congressman Joe Walsh, this is The Social Contract with Joe Walsh. Let's figure out how to get okay together. Did you by chance catch any of that fucking idiot at Davos?
I have not seen the Davos speech yet, but I've certainly heard about it. And of course, I saw Gavin Newsom's
Yes, yes,
free reaction
yes.
to the speech because, of course, and I really am happy to see Newsom standing up. He's almost like he's becoming on the level of a head of state. You know,
Yeah,
he is
absolutely.
really, and it's unprecedented to have a governor of an important state in the
Yeah.
United States who is directly challenging the president, which is, I mean, it's awesome
Yeah.
in that way on the international stage.
Agreed. That voice, everybody, as you come in, hello, you know the rules, pound those red hearts. That does something to the algorithm. I don't know, but pound those red hearts. And that voice you heard belongs to my guest tonight. And I am so looking forward to this conversation because this conversation is going to be so damn important and relates so much to what we're going through right now, most especially my former political party. My guest is Sean Prophet. Came out with a fascinating book last year called My Cult, Your Cult, Ex-Cult Leader Exposing Authoritarian Psychology. It's, I'll tell you, Sean, it is part case study, it's part biography, but it's like part a warning for so many of us, and I want to get into that with you. But welcome, everybody else. Come on in, press the red hearts. We're going to have a really interesting, substantive conversation tonight. Sean Prophet, my guest, by the way, is on Substack. I'm going to encourage you all throughout the evening, follow him, subscribe to him. And I've read some of his stuff, he writes fascinating stuff. So follow him, subscribe to him on Substack, Sean Prophet, at Exo Prophet. Sean, welcome, brother.
Thank you so much for having me on and for that great introduction.
I think I tend to be, we have a mutual friend named George Elder, who I adore and you adore. I tend to be, and politically, I'm just very informal and blah, blah, blah. But I wanna start with a very basic question because I want my audience, our audience, to understand you and where you're coming from before you and I start to go off on some shit that's happening right now. Um, your book, My Cult, Your Cult. And by the way, everybody, a book that everyone should buy. It's a fascinating read. It is, describe for our audience as we jump into it, your story, uh, coming from where you come from.
Yeah, well, I was born into a right-wing authoritarian cult called the Church Universal and Triumphant. It was started by my parents, and so, I didn't really have a choice in the matter. Other people join cults, but, I was born into it. So, it was quite quite an interesting childhood and quite fascinating to grow up in that environment, not really knowing the world, not really knowing what was outside, and just being curious and having to come to terms with that strangeness, and then ultimately to become an adult and be able to leave that environment and go out into the world. And
But
I
I'm going to ask you, George, Sean, I'm going to ask you questions that I know some of the answers to
okay.
because I've read some of the book, and I want my audience to really understand. Like you were, when you say you were born into it, when did the cult begin?
My father started it in 1958. My mother joined him in 1961. I was born in '64.
And so then when you grew up and the cult was, how would you describe the cult?
Well, it's I would say it's kind of a non-denominational church organization that it incorporated elements of Eastern and Western religions, kind of based on the theosophical charismatic tradition.
Hmm.
My parents called themselves messengers of the ascended masters. And so there's a lot to unpack there. And just very simply, it was progressive revelation, whereas most churches are not claiming to speak for Jesus, for example. They'll teach
Yeah.
Bible lessons or whatever. My parents actually took dictations from Jesus, and other ascended masters claimed to speak directly for them.
Was it, Sean, is it fair to call it a doomsday cult?
Well, it certainly became that, and the proper term is millenarian, which
Yeah.
is the idea that there's gonna be this apocalypse and, everything with the world will be turned upside down and eventually settle down into a golden age. And so that could take the form of, economic collapse, warfare, natural disaster, whatever it is, some kind of divine punishment that will set the world right. And if you think about it, there's a lot of that same dogma in QAnon.
Yeah.
The idea of, of the storm, and, it goes back throughout human history. Many cultures have believed in this sort of apocalypse taking place within their lifetime. And what it really is, and as I've studied this, I've kind of figured out that this is about human mortality. People,
Yeah.
when they believe and they feel their world is falling apart, it's really hard to admit that, that you're gonna die, that your world, everything that you value is eventually going to go away. And so people sort of externalize it onto the larger world and say the world is going to end. And so it's kind of it's a mortality hedge for sure.
Oh, and you grew up in it. At its peak, Sean, how many members of the cult were there?
I'd say we might have had about 75,000. And this was, the peak was really in the '70s and '80s.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we had, teaching centers in every major US city. We had on 5 continents. We were fairly sizable organization. My mother traveled all over the world and held conferences. She met with heads of state. You know,
Again, briefly, then, as you grew up in it and as you became a young man, a teenager, and then a young man, what were your impressions of what your mom and dad were doing?
Well, initially, of course, I supported them because they were my parents, and it seemed like everything they were doing was good, and everything on the outside was bad. And that dynamic that initially seemed like it was protective and very safe
Yeah.
and comforting, suddenly I started to see the downsides of it because we were getting a lot of criticism from the media. After Jonestown happened, particularly, we were being compared to Jonestown, and a lot of negative media attention. And I started to think to myself, gosh, like, are we wrong? Are we really doing things wrong, or is the world wrong for persecuting us? Because it couldn't be both.
And how'd your mom and dad handle the negative media that you were beginning to get?
Mostly my mom ignored it or tried to. She would say things like, she wouldn't read it, and she would say, "The press didn't make me, the press won't break me," kind of thing. It was almost Trumpian in that way.
Yeah. What what
You know?
what on the last question on the cult that you grew up in, play it out for me. What, not you, but what ultimately happened to the cult?
Well, okay, so we had the prediction of Doomsday, which
Yeah.
was supposed to happen in late '89, early 1990, and we built these gigantic bomb shelters.
And you
We spent
really
about
did. You really did.
We really did. I mean, that's, something I talk about in the book. There's some pictures. This project cost in 1990 dollars about 25 million, and that didn't even include the labor of about 200 people working on these things for a couple of years. So I kind of figured, I did some rough math, and I figured that if you try to build those bomb shelters today with a professional crew, it'd be about 150, $200 million.
Where did the money
Sizable
come
complex.
from? Where did the money come from back then?
It was basically the entire kind of endowment of our cult that had
Uh,
been built up since 1958 through various, property sales, contributions, all the things. We basically sold everything. We sold all of our teaching centers around the world, and we took all that money and brought it into Montana, where we were located at the time.
so it became again a doomsday cult. It didn't start out that way.
No, my parents were very much, into positive world
Yeah.
transformation, all the same things that, any religion is into, peace, love, cooperation, harmony, all that stuff, right? But it gradually transitioned into more of an in-group versus out-group situation, right?
Why? Why?
I think, well, if you start to break down what it's really about, a lot of religions contain the same messaging: chosen people, outcasts,
Yeah.
light bearers, fallen ones. And as soon as you start doing that, as soon as you start treating groups differently, like this is the in group, this is the out group, that's what we see. And it translates to nations and polities, right? I mean, you have the same thing going on now with ICE and with
Yeah.
labeling certain groups. These are undesirable. These people do not belong, and they can be removed, and the law doesn't apply to them. And so that same thing on a in a spiritual sense, was what my parents started to do.
Did you, Sean, growing up, and again, everybody, I'm speaking with Sean Prophet. The book that he wrote that came out last year is called My Cult, Your Cult. Fascinating read on its own, and a fascinating read when you think about what what's going on in the country right now. We're going to get to that. Sean grew up in a cult, in a cult that became a doomsday cult, in a cult that built bomb shelters to prepare for the end of the world. I want you all to follow and subscribe to Sean on Substack because he writes on cults, authoritarianism, everything we're dealing with right now. Sean, growing up in the cult, did you have friends outside? Did you have an outside life? What was that like?
Well, initially, no, and mostly no. But what happened is for a little while, I went to public school when I was very young, like 6 and 7 years old, and
Yeah.
then later I went to a public junior high school, or private junior high school, but not the cult. And then my parents eventually started their own school, which is where I graduated high school, and that was only insiders.
Mm. Did you Were you able throughout this, before you left, were you able to retain and keep friends outside, or was that hard?
It was difficult. I mean, the I can't stress enough the insider outsider dynamic in cults,
Mhm.
and it's something that we see replicated in, it's tribal, really. And so outsiders are always held under suspicion.
So then walk through with me as you get older and you begin to question, and then walk through with me in the audience what happened, how you eventually got out and began
Yeah.
your own life.
Well, I left really twice, because what happened is that in around at the end of 1984, I was 20 years old, and I just wanted to go out on my own, and had to do with my girlfriend at the time, who I later married and had 3 children with. But at the time, we were breaking the rules by having a relationship. And so
Ah,
she got kicked out and I followed her right out. And I said, I'm not, I can't, I love this woman. I'm not staying around if I can't be with her. So that created a whole catalyzation. A lot of people closed ranks. A lot of people were, she was fired from her job. I was cut off from the business that I had started with another cult member, and it was another friend had been loaning my girlfriend a car. She took the car back. We were just shunned basically by everyone at that point, and we had to go get jobs and figure out how to support ourselves. And so we did that, and I was out for about 2 years. And then and that was right around the same time my mother started making these bomb shelter prophecies saying
oh,
everybody needed to build bomb shelters. And so I was still not mentally free of it. And I
mhm.
eventually decided to leave Los Angeles and to follow her prophecy. So that's when I went back to Northwestern. I had attended Northwestern for a year, and then so
Yeah.
she said Chicago would be safe, so back to Northwestern. And
Wow.
then 2 years later is when the bomb shelter construction started getting into full swing, so I quit college again and went to Montana to go build the shelters.
And when you did that, where's your mind? Like, where's your head? When you go back and then you're helping your mom build the bomb shelters, what's your
Mhm.
head telling you about the cult, about what's going on?
Well, I had to believe it. I had to believe all of that or else I wouldn't have been there. It's like,
Mm,
I mean, and then that doesn't mean I didn't question, but, I
right.
think a lot of people who have belief systems, they can tend to doubt and believe at the same time, and they can hold the tension of that questioning, and I certainly did, but, as time went on and as we started putting more and more money into these shelters, I started realizing that, hey, if we don't if this calamity doesn't occur, we're gonna be pretty screwed as an organization. We're gonna be, we've spent all this money and we're not gonna have anything left to exist. And so that's in fact how it was. When the prophecy failed and the war did not happen that she had predicted, then we had to pick up the pieces, pay off the debts, and that's what kind of started my journey out. But it took me another few years to finally leave for good.
What was damn you, damn you, damn you, Sean. You're so damn interesting to talk to. Uh, like, so the prophecy did not work out. You build these bomb shelters. The end of the world doesn't come.
Yeah.
Then what happens with your mom? Like when it didn't happen, what was your mom like?
Well, she justified it in terms of, our prayers saved the world, our prayers prevented this from happening, but it was really bogus framing because previously she had been saying prayers for it to happen.
Yeah.
I think, it was a combination of her believing that the world was wicked and needed to be judged, and also, kind of the fact that we had committed ourselves financially and organizationally to this outcome. And so I think it became a matter of survival for us. It was existential. Either the world had to be destroyed, we survive, or we're going to be destroyed and the world survives.
Did when the world survived and calamity did not come, did
Mhm.
people leave the cult?
Quite a few did, yeah. Others, it was a strengthening of their faith.
Mm.
They were like, it all made sense. She predicted it. We prepared and we prayed and we avoided it. That was the narrative.
Then play out then what happens with your mom. Then give me the rest of your story, the story with your mom, and then I want to get to you.
Yeah, well, so she also had some physical
Mhm.
problems, some mental health problems, in that she had early onset Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And she also was a lifelong epileptic, and I talk
Ah,
about this in my book, and there's a whole
yeah.
backstory to that, but, the fact is that it's speculation, but I think that her so-called gift of prophecy might have had something to do with the epilepsy or whatever. We
Mhm.
just don't know. We don't know what was going on there, but, she began to enter some cognitive decline, and around 1999, she resigned as the leader of the cult, and other people took over.
And then
I
what happened? Go
Well,
ahead.
I had been out since
You had been out.
the end of '93 is when I left, and so, and I don't really know a whole lot about what happened to them after that, except for, what I've read in the news and so forth.
You get out in '93, you get out again. This time you get out for good.
For good.
what's your relationship like with your mom then?
Well, she died in 2009, and she
Yeah,
had for the last 10 years of her life, she was on she didn't recognize me, she was under
yeah.
full-time, nursing care and all that.
Was she upset when you got out in '93?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she knew what to think, and
Mm.
I tell, I talk about that quite a bit in my book about how she reacted and, her sort of last ditch attempt to threaten me as I was leaving kinda thing, and you see that a lot in authoritarian cults of all types, that when even bad relationships, when you threaten to leave, that's when, all hell breaks loose.
All right, it's 2026. The year
Mhm.
just began. Sean, as you look back on all of this, as you look back on the life you've lived, like what goes through your head? What do you think about as you look back on all of this?
It's been very discouraging to watch the world follow the same trajectory that my parents did, and
Explain yourself. Explain that. That's fascinating.
well, I thought when I was escaping the cult for the first 5 or 10 years or so, I kind of felt well, it's really 5 years, because I thought I was escaping to a kind of sane world where, reason and science were in charge and people, had had good rationales for doing things. And then 9/11 happened.
Yeah,
And 9/11 is totally the result of a millenarian cult. I mean, the cult of
yeah,
radical Islam, right?
yeah.
That is, again, they want to see the apocalypse. They want to see the world put right according to their, standards. And that was what that attack was all about.
Um, are there lessons learned when you look back now? You wrote the book. What are some of the important lessons that you've learned that we all need to hear now?
Well, what I can tell you is that in 2015, like a lot of people, I was just absolutely horrified when I saw Trump starting to get traction. And I had
What do you
heard
think? What did you think from your perspective when you first saw him on the scene?
I've heard this all before. That's what I was thinking. I've heard this all before. And, I alone can fix it. Some of the ascended masters in my cult would say things like that,
Wow.
that only through this path, only through this teaching, can the world be saved, right? It's the same. It was the same thing. And I could just tell by the way that he made decisions, the way that he spoke, how, it was beyond lying, right? I mean, he was literally just throwing whatever up against the wall to see what would stick, kind of A/B testing, right? For what would get him free publicity, what would get him the biggest reaction. And he did the same thing that we did. My mom dismissed the news as, fake
Yeah,
and biased.
yeah.
Trump, fake news, right? I mean, everything that he did and said, there's a corollary in my cult, and I had heard it before, and that's why I was horrified when he started to run, and when he won, I was speechless. I
Were
was
you
speech
surprised?
I was shocked. I couldn't believe it.
Mm.
And I think a lot of other Americans, and by the way, you have demonstrated extraordinary courage in
Well,
stepping away from that whole world,
or stupidity, Sean.
Well, I guess, I mean, I read that you lost an entire syndication deal, like, overnight when
I
the minute you
I
is
took
that
a
true?
blowtorch to my career.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um,
yeah,
but you, Sean, to your point, 99.9% of my former congressional colleagues remained in the cult.
mhm,
99.9% of my right-wing media colleagues stayed in the cult.
right,
Um, is that an odd, weird thing for you to say? You see, and maybe I'm missing this, you see
mm.
some of your mom in what Trump has said and done over the years.
I think she would have despised him because she was
Interesting.
educated and literate,
Yeah, your mom
and
wa
a
I
and
Trump's an idiot. Your
yeah,
mom clearly wasn't an idiot.
she had a degree in poli sci. I mean,
Yeah.
she was, she would have despised him on some things, but she also was anti-abortion. She was, all the right-wing check boxes down the line that you can think of. She would have agreed with him. So I don't know, a lot of evangelicals have sort of made this compromise where they believe
Yeah.
that Trump is the vessel, the imperfect vessel that God is using to bring in the kingdom, right? That's kind of the framing, and why they can say, okay, well, this guy is crass and he's, he does this and that, and he's, possibly a pedophile, all the different things, right? But it's like, but the Lord works in mysterious ways, right? So,
Y yeah, and we can talk about this, but, like, and I've written about it extensively. You've talked about it and written about it. I believe that the most powerful animating force in my former party right now is white Christian nationalism,
absolutely.
and they're not even subtle about it anymore. Talk to that.
Well, I think in some ways, I mean, we were very much separated from the mainstream evangelical movement,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I think our goals were very similar in the sense of what kind of political order we wanted to see in the world. My mom used to talk about God government. She used to talk about,
mhm,
which is
yeah,
theocracy, and that's the same thing that Michael Flynn says.
yeah,
He wants one nation, one religion, all this kind of stuff, and it's this is the same. It's the same impulse. And my dad was a member of the John Birch Society.
yeah,
Uh, he went to, he and I went to visit Billy James Hargis in
mhm,
Tulsa at one
yeah,
point when I was about 6 years old. I mean, he was palling around with all these people. He wanted desperately to be accepted by evangelicals, but they wouldn't have anything to do with somebody who was a supposed messenger of
right,
God because they consider that to be satanic, right?
yeah.
So it was a weird mix.
Those of us who have not lived it, and you are expert in it, and you've lived it, cults.
Mhm.
I mean, I've described my MAGA movement, the movement that I was part of, as a cult. Others do politically. When you look at MAGA, when you look at what Trump's following, do you consider it to be a cult?
Without a doubt, without a question. I mean, it is and it has to do more with it's not. I mean, there's plenty of populist political
Yeah,
figures.
sure.
It's not uncommon to see this type of loyalty, but what I think is different with Trump is that people actually have their identity invested in him. They
It
they say they
it's
call him
just
daddy. They call it they they
yeah.
it's a personal relationship, almost like saying they want a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, right? It's like, Trump becomes almost like a Christ-like figure. And and so when he says something, they rather than going, "That's false," or "That's not true," they will try to shapeshift their identity to
Mhm.
fit to fit whatever it is that he's saying, and it's impossible because he says so many contradictory, incoherent things, and so I imagine people are people are really probably struggling to keep up right now.
Why and I've again, you and I come from different worlds, and I come from the political sphere. I've got my own theories that I've talked about. But from your perspective, Sean, why do so many of his followers put their entire identity into him?
Well, I think some of it comes from having been, there was a time in the mid to late 20th century where, we were having all this progress, this increased civil rights. We had, we had most of the judiciary was liberal, Supreme Court was liberal, and so we were seeing,
Mhm.
kind of a reduction in hierarchy, a more
Yeah.
egalitarian system coming into being, multicultural. We were seeing a lot of immigration. Reagan himself gave amnesty to millions of
Mhm.
immigrants who came in. So we kept seeing an expansion of who is included in America. And I think a lot of, I'm sorry, white folks that look like you and me felt like they were being disincluded. They were being, but because it's like pie, right? There's only so much pie, and if one person gets more, then everybody else gets less. And I feel like white people are very aware of how they have treated minorities for most of this nation's history. And they're also aware that demographically by 2045 or something like that, whites become a minority in America. So I think a lot of this reaction has to do with the fact of being afraid, white people being afraid that minorities will treat white people the way that white people used to treat minorities.
What completely agree that that's a major part of what's happening. Sean, the cult that you grew up in, was it racially diverse? Was it all white? What was it?
It's interesting because our tradition was the theosophical tradition, which has recognizes Eastern masters like El Morya, Cthulhu, Dwal Kul, and these other masters that were sort of, I guess, either invented or whatever you want to call it by uh, Helena Blavatsky, right? So there was that acceptance of the Eastern culture, and there was also acceptance of Black Americans
Mhm.
and other races as well. You know, we accepted interracial marriage within our community. And so it was more egalitarian than our predecessor, which had been the Mighty I Am movement led by Guy and Edna Ballard. And they were very racist, extremely
Yeah.
racist. They had segregated sanctuaries. Even after the Civil Rights Act, they maintained segregation within their organization.
Do do cult leaders, Sean, need to be authoritarian figures?
Let's just say that I think cults, in order to be strong, there's some
Yeah,
scholarship on this, that strict churches and cults are stronger than more liberalized ones because entry and exit costs are higher, right? So
yeah.
you gotta sacrifice something. That gets rid of free riders. So if you want a really strong, tight-knit, cohesive group, it's gonna be authoritarian. You know,
Makes
liberal
sense.
liberal
Yeah,
denominations, right? People can come and go,
yeah, yeah.
not as strong. You don't see this, you know, you don't see the fanatical devotion as much because the fanaticism goes along with the authority.
Sean, how did you get out and relate that to like MAGA and Trump's following? How do people get out? And it's sort of a leading question because I work with MAGA folk all the time and I've got some ideas, but I want to hear your perspective. How did you get out? How do they get out?
I don't think there's a one size fits all, method. I go through quite a number of steps in my book, you know,
Yeah,
beginning to question, looking at disconfirming information, because that's the one thing that happens in cults is people naturally weed out any sort of, with confirmation bias. It's
yeah,
like, this
yeah.
makes me feel good, therefore it's true, therefore I'm going to believe it. Right. And so you have to go back to the sort of institutional consensus that predates MAGA, right? I mean, the fact that, science is true, 2 plus 2 equals 4, there's 24 hours in a day, climate change is real, you know, race, it matters politically, but we are all one species. We're not, like race should not divide us. Like that's a scientific fact. We share much more of our DNA in common than differences. So the whole thing is if people can orient toward a more scientific perspective against and against this sort of loyalty authority based perspective, because that's all it is. It's like daddy said so, therefore it's true, therefore I believe it. Right.
Yeah, that's so spot on, Sean, because I engage with these folks every day and not a week goes by where I'm not able to help one or two leave. And the best path to success I've found is when I very respectfully but firmly continue to put nuggets of truth in front of them until they're up against a wall and they cannot deny that basic truth. And if
Right.
you do that patiently, eventually kind of a light bulb goes off, I've found.
Yeah, well, it reaches a point of cognitive rupture is where suddenly the contradictions just become too great to maintain. But people will go through every possible contortion up until that point because it's painful. And let me be clear, I think people who leave cults do lose something of value.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to grieve that. They're going to have to rebuild social relationships. It's not just simply, oh, you can get out and be free. No, this is a kind of a lifelong thing where you have to process and then you have to step backward and realize what was it that made me vulnerable to this? What beliefs did I have in the beginning that attracted me to this? How did I get to the point where I was willing to take half of America and make them, you know, out the out group, make them outsiders, say that they don't belong? How did I get to that point where, you know, it used to be we were all one nation, right? One nation that felt if, if you're an American anywhere in the world, we're together, right? That's how it used to be for us, and I miss actually that sense of pride that we had as
Was
a
it
nation.
was it Sean, when you got out in '93, the second and final time, did it take some time for you to adjust, to get acclimated, to live a life?
Very much so because, you had the authority structure and the belief system, and I had already begun to sort of take that apart, but then you also
Yeah,
had the politics because we all voted Republican. I mean,
always.
I voted
Okay.
for Reagan. I mean, and then in 92, I believe I voted Democrat for the first time.
Ooh,
When Bill Clinton was
okay.
elected. So but it took a while to get there, to get to the point where, I went from what I would term kind of a capitalistic fascism, which is what we all believed, into where I am now, which is more libertarian socialism, right? And I don't think that neither of those maps cleanly onto the
Oh,
Democratic or Republican Party. But I'm just saying, for me,
yeah,
like right now, the biggest litmus test for any politician is, do they believe in equality or do they believe in hierarchy? And I am going to support the one who believes in equality every single time, what regardless of what party they're in, right? I mean, I almost wish sometimes that we were like Europe, where we had
yeah,
multiple parties, multi-party, parliament. Because right now, having to choose Democrat versus Republican, it's like I'm pretty much always going to pick the Democrat right now. But there's also a split within that party.
yeah.
I'm much to the left. I'm much more progressive than most Democrats. So I wish that there would be like, a credible Green Party that could actually win seats in Congress, to vote for or something like that.
Are you I'm gonna ask, are you blown away based on the life you've lived? You're probably not. By what you continue to see every day, by what you continue to see him say and do that he's done for this first year of his second term, and the way people still stay with him,
Yeah,
based on everything he does every day.
here's the thing, right? I mean, think whatever you want about Ronald Reagan, but if you were a Reagan supporter, you didn't question whether somebody supported America, right? And with some of these Trump supporters, I question whether they even support the idea of America. I mean, what is America if we're not part of NATO? What is America if we don't try to guarantee freedom and democracy around the world? What are we if we're not helping, freedom and justice movements? I mean, it's not all about us. It's about how we show up in the world. It's about trade. It's about, you know, I just don't think that we are living up to anything close to our values, and this administration has caused the entire world to question us now.
I agree with a lot of that, and I do believe. And what's so interesting, Sean. So I was in Congress,
Mhm.
what, like 13 years ago, before
Yeah.
Trump ever first got elected,
Yeah.
and even back then, I would say publicly, and I'd hold a town hall back then before Trump, and I would openly wonder, can this experiment in self government stay together? Can America stay together? Should we get an amicable divorce? We're done. Let's just go our
Mhm.
separate ways. And it always came for me to that I don't know that we all agree anymore on what this thing called America is.
Right.
And I'm still there. I still wonder. But that goes to what I was going to say. Then Trump comes along. Do you agree with me that Donald Trump, as hideous a human being as he is,
Mhm.
he's not the cause of what
Oh, no.
ails us, he's the symptom. Explain.
He's a figurehead. I mean, here's the thing. 2016, he got 26% of the eligible vote. In 2024, he got 31%. That is
Mhm.
still a vast minority of all Americans. And, you know, obviously a certain number of people who didn't show up to vote would have voted for him. Like if everybody voted, I don't know if it would have been that low. But the fact is that most of America did not want this guy. And most of America saw through him. And I think
Bu
that
Right, but what I guess what I was getting at, tell me if you agree, Trump is the fact that we've put him in that office twice, to me, tells me there's something really fucking wrong with our politics, with our political system, with our country, with our people. Like he's the product of a horribly broken politics, a horribly broken body politic. This
Yeah.
country is unbelievably divided. Trump didn't cause
Mhm.
that. I think he's made everything worse, but like he's the symptom of a country that's got real problems. Do
Right,
you
well,
agree?
yeah, and I think a lot of this goes back to the kind of hardcore white supremacy of great replacement theory, and the sort of watered down version of great replacement theory is just plain white extinction anxiety, and it goes back to this demographic transition that I mentioned earlier, and I think that is the fracture, that is the point, right? And there are people in this country who just don't wanna live in a multicultural democracy. They believe, there's all kinds of pseudo academic theories about, various racial inferiority. It's all bunk. It's all nonsense. It's been proven over and over again. And yet there's still this group of people who just, they'll burn the whole place down before they'll share it with other cultures.
You grew up in a cult. You got out of a cult.
Mhm.
Uh, Trump's following, the MAGA base, is a cult.
Mhm.
Based on everything you've lived through and everything you know about cults, how what's going to happen to this cult?
Well, no cult lasts forever, right? And
And
a
by the way,
lot.
can I ask you a question, Sean?
Sure.
If this is a stupid question, slap me upside the head. Uh, Is that's really true, isn't it? No cult lasts forever.
No, I mean, and there can be successful succession in cults. I mean,
Okay.
you look at some
Okay.
of the older religions. There's some the religions that started as cults, like like Mormonism, have now become
Yeah.
very established, and they're around 200 years later, right? So
Yeah.
so it is possible to have a transition to a stable, and that requires going from the personality cult to the institutional cult, right? And then gradually, and what separates a cult from a religion is accountability, right? If you have an institution that has bylaws and a board of directors and somebody is answerable to them, versus a dictator. That is the real
Is
difference.
is Trump's cult right now a personality cult still, or is it an institutional cult in your mind?
Well, he certainly wouldn't have had as much success if it wasn't for a, lapdog Congress who pretty much does whatever he wants. I mean, what's the point of having a Congress if Republicans
Hey,
will never oppose
by the
him,
way,
you
Sean,
know?
can I correct you? Can I correct you? We do not have a Congress. It
Right,
doesn't
okay.
exist.
Okay,
Go, but
thank
I
you.
get your point.
Yeah, very much so, and so we need the loyal opposition. We need Republicans like you who are willing to come to their senses and say, "This guy is a flim-flam artist. He's a sham. There's nobody behind the curtain," you know?
Well, so go to that because again, I'm older than you. I don't think in my lifetime my party is ever going to recover from this. That's just my opinion. But I do agree with you that when it comes to people in MAGA, only reformed MAGA gangbangers can be
Mhm.
the ones to talk to them, listen to them. Do you agree with that? Like,
That's right, and you're in fairly rare company. I mean, Adam Kinzinger and a few
there
others,
aren't many.
there are not many, and so and,
Yeah,
there's a couple. There's one guy who voted for impeachment who now I guess he was involved in the RFK Jr.,
yeah.
confirmation, and there's that whole story, but by and large, no. I mean, it's just been utter collapse. These people are in lockstep, and that is what is keeping him in power. And by the way, I don't know, like, it's an open question, like, what happens if it becomes Vance? If Vance either accedes to the office, through a natural death, or if he wins the election in 28, what does MAGA do after that? I don't know. It depends on how well Vance handles that succession process. And is he
Sean,
the heir
that's
apparent? We don't know.
well, that Sean, that's fascinating because there is a school of thought that you can never replace the original cult leader. I suppose if you look back on your experience, if your mom had left early,
Mhm.
was she replaceable? Is it really difficult or almost impossible to replace a cult leader?
Well, yes and no. If there's an anointing of the successor, and
Mm.
if they can feel that transference where, this sort of personal bond that goes, it's almost a spiritual bond with the
Yeah.
leader, right? And if that can translate over, but there's a problem of charisma. JD Vance does not have charisma. And so I think it's going to be a tough sell.
How
If he
big
can
a deal is that? Because Trump, again, you and I think he's a fucking idiot. I don't find anything funny about him, but people will say and make a case for his charisma.
He has a ton of charisma, and there's no denying it.
You, and so that is that important.
It is. I mean, it's the way the whole thing works, right? It's the way cults work, and it's a bond, right? It's not just somebody fooling a bunch of people. It's an interactive bond between the leader and the followers. The followers want it. They literally were looking for someone like Trump who would get out there and just start, disparaging people on racial grounds. The whole shithole countries. There's no such thing as a shithole country. I mean, that implies that all the people from there are there's something wrong with them, and that device alone, right? Any place that he calls a shithole country, if you're an immigrant from there, you're automatically a second class citizen now, because the president of the United States said so. It,
So, my cult expert, play both scenarios. How would MAGA continue for a long, long time, even after Trump dies? How could that happen?
well, certainly it can happen through taking over the mechanisms of elections, because I fully believe they intend to invalidate all future elections if they can get away with it. And I'm not predicting doom. I think that if we have a fair midterm election this year, that they're going to get creamed. They're going to get their asses handed to them by Democrats, because people are sick and tired of it. They're sick and tired of tariffs. They're sick and tired of ICE. They're sick and
Mhm.
tired of hearing this nonsense. They don't, they love Europe, and they value our friendships with Denmark, and they don't want us to seize Greenland. They think it's ridiculous that we went into Venezuela and kidnapped the the leader. I mean, just everything. Americans are fed up. And so if we have a fair election, then I think that they're going to lose Congress and, ultimately the presidency in 28. However, this cult is anti-democratic, and they are working on voter
Yeah.
suppression. They are working on, shutting down polling places. They're working on getting rid of vote by mail. They're working on, decertifying election results. I mean, every possible angle. They purged voter rolls in 24. There were millions of people who should have been voting in 24 who
Yeah.
didn't. That could have changed the outcome of that election already. So, if to answer your question, this is now a population scaled cult. It's no longer like it's not. This is not some just weird group over here. It's a
No.
population scaled cult. They have national security establishment behind them. They have the military behind them. They have a lot of levers of power to be able to
They
stay
have
in power.
Sean, you're so right. Look, it is a cult that has taken over fully one of America's two major political parties.
Right.
Period. And by the way, everybody who's listening right now, my guest is Sean Prophet. Um, Fascinating story. And because Sean has had such a fascinating life, the stuff he writes about what's happening in America right now are just a must read. Please follow and subscribe to Sean right here on Substack. Sean Prophet, subscribe to him. Um,
Here's the book, and
sh-
I have there's a
there's a
chapter
book.
in
Hold
here.
that up. Hold that up. Beautiful. Go
There's a
ahead,
chapter
Sean.
in here on totalitarianism and another one on MAGA. I go through and I analyze what happened with the Third Reich. There's also a chapter on morality and how we come to terms with moral questions. And there's something in here for everybody. And I really hope that
Hey,
I can shed some
knucklehead,
light.
knucklehead, hold that book up again.
Okay, here we go.
There it is. It's called My Cult, Your Cult. Fascinating read. Sean, thank you. Sean grew up in a cult, period. A cult that became a doomsday cult, a cult that built a bunch of bomb shelters. By the way, Sean, whatever happened to the bomb shelters?
They're still there. You can see them on Google Earth. They're
Jeez.
huge. It's basically it's like several football fields long of a capacity for 700 people to live underground.
My last question for you, my friend.
Sure.
Every single American who cares about this country and watches what's happening every fucking day and is not part of MAGA can alternatively feel exhausted and helpless and, oh my God, talk to them like you you grew up in a cult. You understand what's happening right now with my former party. Give how do the rest of us win to preserve this republic? Give us some hope.
I wish that I could give more hope, but I think that the only hope is going to be sort of reinvigorating our institutions. We've got to rebalance the judiciary. I think the Federalist Society has done terrible damage. We have to support science. We have to start getting out in front of green energy. I mean, if we had stuck with green energy from the beginning, we would be leading the world on it right now instead of China. And that's the problem is that I don't know how else I can say it. We have to fix all of these things or we're gonna be in for worse problems going forward, and we have to it's really all about power. We have to find a way to get these people out of power by whatever means necessary, because this is when you've got the US military and Department of Homeland Security going up against local police, state National Guard. I mean, this is getting pretty damn close to civil war at this point, and so
It's
we've got to
yeah.
win it. We have to win
Yeah.
it, and that's the only
Well,
hope.
well, and Sean, that's a great way to end is we have to win it. And that's why this former Tea Party guy 8 months ago formally joined the Democratic Party because I think it's going to take a huge fucking tent, from Joe Walsh on the right to Zoran Mamdani on the left. It's going to take all of us right now to defeat what my former party is. So let's quit yelling at each other and bitching among each other. Let's go defeat what that has become, what Republicans have become.
Here's what's really important, and we have been sunk in multiple presidential elections by intra-party rivalry among
Yeah.
Democrats. And it's like there's two choices here, folks. There is MAGA or there's Democrats. Anything else, any sort of quibbling, it's like we can have those primary fights. That's fine. We can have primary fights all day long. But in the general election, you just have to write down
Suck it
D.
up, Buttercup. Suck it up, Buttercup. Hey,
Exactly.
my guest, Sean Prophet. Get his book, My Cult, Your Cult. Get that book. There it is, Sean. Put it up there again. An amazing read. And this is a really fascinating fellow to follow here and subscribe to on Substack. Sean Prophet's his name. Exo Prophet at Exo Prophet. Sean, my friend, thank you so much, brother, for your time.
Joe, it's been so much a pleasure.
Thanks, man. Thanks, everybody. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, follow, and share The Social Contract with Joe Walsh on Apple, Spotify. Plus, don't forget to subscribe to The Social Contract on Substack. This has been The Social Contract with Joe Walsh.